Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. TikTok will be banned on Sunday unless its parent company ByteDance divests its U.S. operations to an American entity. The Supreme Court is getting involved, and so is a billionaire we've been following a lot, Elon Musk. Here to explain what this all means is Derek Sell. He is a breaking news reporter and my colleague at Forbes. Derek, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's start from the 30,000-foot view. There are reports that Elon Musk could acquire TikTok, but how did we get here?
Yeah, so there's been news, I think, dating back to early 2020 about the potential for a TikTok ban, which accelerated really last year. The latest is that last week the Supreme Court heard oral arguments from TikTok opposing the ban, which is set to go in effect on January 19th, which is Sunday. Unless they sell the US operations to an American entity. And uh, on Monday, we had Bloomberg and then Wall Street Journal report that Chinese officials are potentially eyeing Elon Musk if ByteDance is forced to sell and does intend to move forward with that as opposed to just shutting down the app, which has been the company's main indication thus far.
And has Musk commented, and do we know how likely it is for this to be the outcome with him as the owner of TikTok, or at least the American operations?
Yeah, so he hasn't commented, which, and this is completely me editorializing, which means that there's probably some level of merit to the reports. But I think it's also important to be clear. The reports don't say anything about Musk, or it would likely be via X, formerly known as Twitter, that would take over TikTok. Um, but there's no indication that there have actually been any discussions with Musk or X. It's just that there have been discussions on the China side of things that Musk, who does a lot of business in Tesla, analysts say have a strong relation, does a lot of business in China with Tesla, has a strong relationship with Chinese officials, and is used to what doing business in China entails. Um, that he would be a likely trusted partner. Um, but again, that it's putting odds on it. I mean, obviously, it depends on if the ban actually goes into effect. And it's definitely a bit of a game of chicken at this point. Um, but we do have a group that actually did submit a bid, led by billionaire Frank McCourt. Uh, Also, Kevin O'Leary's and from of Shark Tank fame is in there. Um, but I think that it's somewhat of a long shot that Musk would take over TikTok and X, but who knows? There's very few other people that would have the paper required to take over TikTok. I mean, he's almost $200 billion richer than anyone else on the planet. Um, and also the fact that he could fold it in tax. I mean, he could probably take pretty normal financing routes as opposed to when he first acquired Twitter in 2022, where he had to sell a lot of his Tesla shares. So I think it's long shot, but there's absolutely a chance.
So he is in the financial position to acquire it, but whether or not he's able to is a political question, it sounds like, because we have the Supreme Court weighing in. We've had some US politicians putting proposals on Congress floor asking President Biden to delay this January 19th deadline. What where do you expect we'll be 1 week from now? Is everything just going to get pushed into President-elect Trump's new term? Or will on January 19th, TikTok disappear from everyone's phones?
Yeah. So to to your last point there was reporting in the information in the Verge overnight that TikTok plans to make the app go dark on Sunday, as opposed to what was previously thought would be that the ban would go into effect and then basically the app would slowly not work because no updates would be able to go in. So, over the course of months, maybe a year. Um, so if the if the app does go dark, I mean, I think that accelerates the timeline, obviously, I know that obviously TikTok too, it's significantly more popular with younger people. I believe that there's Pew Research from June. I think it's over 55% of Americans under the age of 30 are using TikTok. And I think what's core to TikTok versus other social media is the user engagement time is really high. I know personally, I can get sucked into TikTok. But yeah, I mean, I think the answer is again, I think that we don't we don't know. And I will, to the point of Trump, he has lobbied to extend the deadline. Obviously, January 19th is Biden's last day in office. And the president likely has the power to extend the deadline by 90 days. Um, but there's not a ton of legal backing depending on who you ask, of like whether they really need to extend the deadline by one day just so that the presidency changes hands. Um, so I will say then for prediction markets, which you can argue on the veracity for, but along the lines of Kalshi, Polymarket, they priced in the odds of a ban going into effect within 3 months. So accounting for that Trump potential Trump extension at around 75-80%.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's likely, and I don't, those aren't always like great proxies. You can, but we saw around election day that those did come to prominence, and there are people actually putting money on it. So there's a really good chance that we won't have TikTok, whether it's in next week or this summer.
And as you look at Musk as a potential acquirer of the US operations, and I know you mentioned some other very wealthy people and billionaires, but Musk already owns X, formerly known as Twitter. Are there any antitrust concerns with his, let's just, play fantasy football here. If he were to acquire TikTok, would that be an entity? And if you were to fold it under Twitter, would that be an entity that would draw the attention of regulators?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the answer is who are the regulators that will be in place starting next week. I mean, I know the he always has issues with the SEC. Yesterday, the SEC sued him over that acquisition of Twitter, of basically that he was late to report that he had acquired via legal means. I think it was a 10% stake, but it's you have to report immediately if you acquire a 5% or greater stake in a public company. So they said he underpaid for Twitter by I think about $150 million, which he categorized as a political move. So I I I, I guess to a certain extent it's looking at he probably has a pretty good grip on what US regulation looks like. And, and all indications are we're going to see a lot friendlier regulatory position towards a lot of Musk's companies. A lot of that is focused on how Tesla will be regulated. Um, but yeah, I mean, there would be antitrust concerns. I mean, there's a lot of issues too of when M&A is happening across country lines. I mean, look at this is not a great example, but the whole U.S. Steel takeover by a Japanese company that went up in flames. I mean, and this would be a huge huge financial figure too. Um, there was Wedbush analyst Dan Ives. He estimated the price tag is probably 40 billion to 50 billion. I mean, that's right in the range of Twitter, but I mean that's one of the largest acquisition deals ever. So yes, there would absolutely be a lot of hurdles um, if it did come to that point.
You anticipated my next question. I was going to ask, again, playing this fantasy football, how much the price tag would be. So, based on your reporting, do you think that 40 to 50 billion dollar price tag on TikTok's US operations is a fair price?
Sure. So I think it's just that it depends on what you're actually acquiring. I think it's funny. A lot of the reporting in shorthand is saying that, oh, is Elon Musk going to buy TikTok? No, it's the U.S. operations of TikTok. Like it's not. TikTok is a huge global entity, and the U.S. is only a small component of that. I think there have been estimates as low as around 20 billion. Um, there have been estimates as high as close to 100 billion. The whole issue is that it seems like ByteDance is not going to give away the addictive algorithm. And so without that, it's an app that has high engagement, great. And I think that also you could probably argue that Elon Musk is basically the face of AI and machine learning, that if anyone was to not have the algorithm and be tasked with trying to replace it, the engineers with him would probably be there. And there's also not X, but there's XAI, his generative AI startup that develops Grok, which is like within X. There's all these blurred lines, but um, but ByteDance itself is valued at, I believe that Forbes' latest valuation is about 230 billion. Again, it's all very tricky, and it's tricky also the involvement of the Chinese government because, but um, TikTok is also just kind of a fraction of their revenue. But there's kind of the argument of, it's like, are you acquiring Facebook, and is this getting Facebook in 2010? Like the user engagement's so high, they don't turn a profit, but there's so much potential, and eyeballs and user engagement are money. Um, so I think 40 to 50 billion is a very good midpoint, and TikTok is more popular than Twitter was 2 years ago. Twitter was also not a profitable business. So I think that's a good starting point.
There are some really interesting parallels between what was Twitter and what is now TikTok's US
Yeah.
operations. And I've previously spoken with our colleague Emily Baker White about the engagement that you, Derek, just talked about. And we see at Forbes a lot of creators who are building businesses on TikTok. So I know you spend a lot of your time looking at markets and M&A, but have you talked to or heard from any creators about how they're feeling at this moment in time about all this uncertainty? I've seen some reporting around folks fleeing to something what I think is called Redstone, or
Red Note.
what is it called?
Red Note.
Red Note, there we go. Third time's a charm. So how are regular people feeling about this? And I should caveat this question with saying I would not know because I am not on TikTok.
Yeah, so I am absolutely on TikTok. My fiance is also very much on TikTok, and I don't think she's not as much of a avid consumer of news, but she's very upset about the prospect about it. But yeah, I mean, I think to your point with creators, I mean, these are people that have establish their livelihood on here. I mean, Forbes does a lot of reporting via 30 under 30, and the top creators are, I mean, these are people that are making like real 6, 7 figure salaries, like from TikTok. And part of it can be via brand partnerships, not just the TikTok creators fund. Um, but yeah, I think that there's a general feeling of nerves, and people spend a lot of time on TikTok. I've seen a trend across where there's a lot of young people I've seen who are like, I will personally hand deliver my government my data to the CCP. Like I like TikTok that much. And I think that uh, with Red Note, I'm not as familiar, but I think that we've seen there's definitely been some creators that are saying they're going over there, but Red Note is very much, it looks a little more authoritative. And I know there's a lot more restrictions than TikTok is regulated like a normal social media app that we're used to. Like, I think that there are a little more speech and content restrictions that are on Red Note.
Well, there are a lot of questions going forward, and we've talked about a lot of them, but what will you be looking at in the next 24 to 48 hours? What is the number one question you'll be asking your sources or things that you'll be looking for in the news?
I think that what's next is definitely what's most interesting. I mean, obviously, if TikTok ends up not being banned, it's pretty status quo. Um, but I think that if we see, let's say the ban goes through on Sunday, the app goes dark. I mean, one, what's Trump's response? And then also, what's the not just what's the market response, but I mean, what are these companies that all of a sudden, I mean, you look at obviously Meta with Instagram Reels would be the top, but I mean, also you have Google with YouTube Shorts, Snapchat to a smaller extent. I mean, we have some other smaller competitors. What's the reaction there? How much are they flooding into? I mean, look at specifically Meta, Alphabet, even X with Musk. I mean, are they? They're huge, huge companies. I mean, if you look at too, I mean, Meta and Alphabet they're trillion-dollar companies. So what is kind of that gold rush to TikTok establish that short form video is incredibly valuable. And again, I know that Instagram Reels is definitely the top competitor, but I will say, as someone that's used both, I mean, TikTok is definitely better for the user at this point. Um, so yeah, I think that it's that next step. We saw Meta shares, they rallied about 2% on Friday when the Supreme Court indicated that they were probably leaning towards upholding the ban. So is there going to be a huge rally there? Or also, I mean, you look at from the private versus public company component, which is why maybe X is a better fit. This is not a profitable business to invest that much into short form video content. We haven't really seen a great monetization of advertising, other than basically YouTube across any social media. So are these huge companies gonna dive in and you know, try to corner this area of the market that no longer exists? Or is it gonna be kind of pause off and wait until, a new entrant comes in?
Those are all good questions, and we will be following your reporting. Derek Saul, thank you so much for joining us on a very busy news day. We so appreciate your time and your insight.
Thank you so much, Maggie.